Welcome along to my new top 10 list for the biblical periods. I've done lots of lists now and you've probably seen quite a few of them. Do check out my other videos if you want to know about classical period. I've done top 10s for the best units and the worst units. High Middle Ages, I've done the same. LA as well, and now we're here. I don't know so much about this period, and so we'll investigate together, but the more I study and look at the armies, the more interesting it all gets. So without further ado, we're going to start my number 10, the Assyrian style cavalry. Now they actually just beat out quite a similar unit, which is the Iranian armored cavalry. They cost 2 more, but they've got light spear. So they're almost the same unit, but on impact, they're plus 50 up against the Iranian armored cav. They both units have got the bow. So they are actually slightly better. And so that Iranian armored cav is also very good. But I think my vote goes for these units. You see quite a lot of cavalry with bow, also with the chariots as well. But the thing about the chariots is they're unmaneuverable. So the heavy chariots anyway. So that gives this cav a little bit of an advantage there, and yet they've still got a bow. You don't see so many lancers in this period, but you know that combination of superior quality, the expert version, superior quality, armored with bow, with spear, that is pretty strong. So against a lot of the Greek armies, Lydian armies, the Hoplite armies, they just tend to have standard cavalry with no bow and some chariots. So that's when these units will come in really handy. Obviously, Persian lists, Babylonian lists, Medes and so on, they've got more of this kind of cav, but the Greek armies don't. So that's when they can come in really handy. So yeah, they go in at number 10. At number 9 on my list, I'm going to put the Lydian Hoplites, stroke armored hoplites, same unit. Now, if you remember, and if you've been following my videos, I actually put the armored hoplites down as one of the worst units in the classical period. But I have to say that in the earlier period, in biblical period, they do much better, and there are a few reasons why. Firstly, I'd like to say a shout out to Gerfand. He comments sometimes on some of my videos, and he made a very good point. His point was that even though I'm quite critical of armor, I'm often saying that it's overpriced. Actually, armor does give you a bonus against missile fire, and that is especially important in the earlier periods because you get so many mixed bow units, Sparrow Foot, the Immortals, Babylonian mixed bow units. There's just a lot more bowmen on the battlefield, and so if you're going up against the Persians, this armor can be crucial, and that is a large reason why I'm putting them amongst my best units, top 10, and in classical I put them in the worst. And also the problem with classical is you've just got pikes. They don't do great against pikes. You've got impact foot, warband legionnaires. You don't really get that much impact foot in this period. Large units, warband pikes, you don't get them either, so they're just going to do much better against the mixed bow, Egyptian spear, the Mede spear, a lot of medium foot as well on the battlefield. So that's when the armoured hoplites can actually be really good. And in this kind of army, this is the Lydian, one of the Lydian army lists. They're actually our best infantry. We don't get any veteran hoplites. We haven't even got any citizen hoplites. It jumps down to irregular. So they're actually a vital part of this army. In stats, they're evens on impact against citizen hoplites, and then they get that plus 25, which isn't a lot, but it's still 25. Sparrow bow of foot, they're evens on impact because that unit has the light spear, but then they go to 100 up in melee, which is fantastic. Even the Immortals, they're 50 down on impact, but then they go to 25 up against Immortals, and Immortals cost 75, so that's pretty good. That's when they become a lot more cost effective because they're only 54 and they're 25 up against Immortals. Okay, the Immortals have this superior quality, but it's still pretty impressive. So overall, they're a pretty good unit, and in my tests and from what I can see from the army composition, okay, this army doesn't have citizen hoplites, but there's some Kyrenian Greeks, the Greeks, some of the Greek armies, they have citizen hoplites, and then it's really important that you mix up your troops with some armor, because lightly protected for irregular foot and protected for the citizen hoplites, you're going to get chewed up a bit by missile fire. So that is really when these guys come into play, and they really allow you to get some units onto the front line in melee before disrupting. It's going to take a bit to disrupt them with missile fire. So they are actually, in the biblical period, pretty crucial. And they go in at number 9. At number 8, on my list, I'm going to put the Camels. I really like Camels, and you don't see them in a lot of periods. You don't really see them in classical or in LA or in early Middle Ages, and then with some of those desert armies in high Middle Ages, you see quite a lot of camels, but they are camel lancers, which are better than these units because these units just have the bow. But in saying that, you probably don't see quite as many lancers in this period, because even these superior armored cav units at 68, they're not lancers. They've got a bow and light spear, so they're probably going to do quite well actually, even though they're not lancers. The disordering factor is roughly a plus 70. So once you factor in the swordsman bonus, then you add on at the end the plus 70. So it effectively means that they're going to be all low-end cav and mid-tier cav and even higher-end cav. They're going to be on a par, really. They're not going to be that much below the superior quality cav of the period. So they're going to be able to hold their own, fire away with the bow. Cav doesn't do well against missile fire, and then with that extra bonus for being camels, they're actually quite a dangerous unit on the battlefield. I don't play a lot of games in this period, and doing these top 10s and looking at the armies, it's made me more interested in this period, and I hope it's the same for you as well. And I'm probably going to produce some videos on my test run series and take out some of these armies that I'm looking at, and we'll see how they go. But for this army, a unit like the Camels is just going to be a help, and I think that they go in my top 10 at number 8, and they are a pretty good unit. At number 7, I'm going to go for an old favourite from LA and High Middle Ages. You see these kind of nomadic horse archer units quite a lot. You don't see them so much in biblical. The nomads, horse archers. 44 is a good price. You've got stuff like light horse archers at 40, the nomad type. They made my top 10 for the worst units. So these are pretty good value because you've got bona fide cavalry, average protected with bow. So they can do a great job. This is the Thracian Getae list. It's quite an interesting mix because you've got medium foot, but it's all spear. So that's quite nice, offensive spear. So they usually do fairly well against most infantry, especially swordsmen. And then you've got some hoplites as well. Not many, just a couple. But really, you're going to do the damage with all the light horse. I mean, okay, and some armies you only get 2 of these, so that's not great. But we can take 4, plus we've got all of the extra light horse. We could even take out a few more spear, and we could add 5 jav horse up to 7 the light horse archers. Probably that's what I would do actually if I was playing for real. Let's take out a few more spear. You're probably not going to win with the spear. Let's see. There we go. We've got even more, and this is really reminds me of the Carthaginian list. I think it's the African list. You got tons of javelin horse. So this is how you're going to annoy your opponent, and you've still got a load of skirmishers here as well. We've got 6 plus the peltasts, so it's about 8. So it's a real kind of skirmisher based army. Now, okay, I do wonder, you've got a fair, like the Persian Cav, it's got bow, so that's a slight disadvantage. But when you've got so much light horse backing you up, I think that this unit can be really effective. Standard cavalry, like armored noble cav, it's going to really struggle against these guys. And you don't get tons of cavalry in this period. So when you've got numbers on your side and loads of cav with bow, that's going to be quite a headache for your opponent. So I think that these units, they're great. They're coming around on the flanks, zoning in on a cav unit. It doesn't take much to disrupt cav with bow, so they can be absolutely lethal. And they can, they're only 44. They can disrupt good quality cavalry. So I might actually take this army out. I'll give it a go, and maybe I'll put it up on YouTube, see how I go against a standard Babylonian or one of the Greek hoplite armies. Also, you've got to remember, even the infantry of the period, yes, there is some armoured hoplites, but there's not so many of them. So a lot of the hoplites would be standard citizen hoplites or mercenary hoplites, and they're only protected. So these kind of troops are going to be great at disrupting infantry as well. So I think they go in at number 7, and they're going to be an interesting unit to use in this period. At number 6 on my list, I'm going to go for the heavy chariots. An important part of the armies in this period. You don't see heavy chariots so much in other periods. They look great. I'd also make the point that these are the slightly cheaper heavy chariots. You get quite a lot of heavy chariots in the Mede and Babylonian, Egyptian armies, but they have the bow and they cost quite a bit more. They're 64, and yes, okay, it's nice to have a bow, but these chariots are a fair bit cheaper and they have light spear. So on impact against the heavy chariots with bow, they are actually 50 up. They're 50 up. So overall, I'd probably rather have this unit because heavy chariots are not maneuverable. So to make full use of bow, you really need quite a maneuverable unit, and you just don't get that with the heavy chariots. So I think that they're a better unit, and they're superior quality. Light spear, they will beat most cavalry. They've got an advantage over cavalry on the battlefield. Early cav, armored cav, they'd be way up, and even Iranian armored cav and armored noble cav, they'd have an advantage as well. So they are excellent, really. When you don't have so many, you're still a little bit like classical, infantry dominated, so you need decent cavalry, and you're going to have the advantages with the heavy cav. So they really are a good unit, and they justifiably go in at number 6. At number 5, it is the Assyrian style heavy foot. I think they're a great price. I've said this a few times in my videos for other periods, but it holds for almost every period, to be honest. We don't see so many infantry units in the 50s. There's not that many. It tends to be like medium foot in the 30s and standard heavies in the 30s, and then more elite units in 70s, and classical we've got legionnaires and pikes. And in LA you've got warband, spear warband in the 70s, and legionnaires as well. But around 50, okay, in this period we've got armored hoplites at 54, but in other periods you don't really get a lot of infantry units in the 50s. There's some Dailami and a few other units, but really not that many. And most of the time, if you can get a unit in the 50s, it's great because you're going to get an advantage with quality or with armor, and we get an armored unit. And what I like also is it's a mixed bow unit, so before impact you can get at least 2 volleys off, and if you've got a few units together, then it's highly likely you're going to disrupt units. Now, okay, in pure stats, they're not brilliant against a lot of units, but citizen hoplites, the evens on impact, only 25 down in melee, which is not a lot really. Mede spear, they're evens on impact and they're 25 up, but Mede spear is medium foot, so they're going to have advantage there because they're heavy foot, and that's the main difference between this other type. You've also got the Assyrian medium foot, but this is the heavy foot, so you get an advantage there. Sparrow bar foot, they're evens on impact and 75 up in melee, which is great. Immortals is interesting, they're 50 down on impact and evens in melee, so that is really good. Armored hoplites, evens on impact, 50 down in melee, but yeah, with having the bow and arrow, mixed bow capabilities, a lot of the time enemy units approaching, you're going to disrupt 1 or 2. If there's 4 or 5 units approaching, it's highly likely you're going to be able to disrupt 1 or 2 just with your missile fire. So they're really a really good unit, really different ways to use them. You can sort of hide them away, put them on a hill, fire on the enemy, but then they can hold their own. you know, a lot of these kind of mixed bow units tend to be medium foot or bowmen, but these are bona fide heavy foot, and you don't see that much. So I think they are a great unit, and 56 is a really good price. You really only see them in the Assyrian list. I did check, and I haven't seen this particular unit in any other army. Yes, the medium foot is in quite a few other lists, Assyrian style medium foot, but not the heavy foot. Also, the guard foot is in a few other lists, like Babylonians, I think, have them, and maybe the Medes, but other lists don't. They don't have the standard heavy. So they go in at number 5. 4th on my list, I'm going to go for the Gibberim. They are in the Hebrew list. Interesting unit because they're superior and armoured with light spear, and they do pretty well against most units. Picked Hebrew foot with light spear and sword. They are 50 up against lots of units on impact. Citizen Hoplites, Sparrow Bower foot, Mede, spear, armoured Hoplites. They're all 50 up against those units on impact, and they're up against almost all of those in melee. 25 up against Citizen Hoplites in melee. Sparrow Bower foot 125 up in melee. Mede, spear, they're 75 up in melee, and evens against armoured Hoplites in melee. So against most units of the period, they have an advantage. Even Immortals, evens on impact, but 50 up in melee against Immortals. So they are pretty good. And yes, there's lots of bowmen and missile fire in this period, but because they're armoured, that gives them a bit of an advantage as well. So I really really like these units. It's a pity they're not impact foot. In the later Jewish lists, you get impact foot, but with their armor and their quality, I think they deserve to go in at 4th on my list. 3rd on my list, I'm going to go for the Assyrian guard foot. I think in this period there aren't so many elite superior quality units, and these guys are pretty good. Superior quality, heavy foot, armored with light spear. So most units that they'll face, they will beat. They're 50 up on impact against Citizen Hoplites, 25 in melee, 50 up on impact against armored Hoplites, evens in melee. But you've got to remember the armoured Hoplites are just average quality, like these Lydian Hoplites, so they're going to have an advantage there in the cohesion checks. Immortals, even on impact and 50 up in melee. Sparrow Bower foot, 50 up on impact, 125 up in melee. This is where they really show their strength, when they're up against the weaker units. Mede foot as well, 50 up on impact, 75 up in melee, and Mede foot is medium foot, so medium foot suffers with additional negative modifiers fighting in the open. Okay, veteran Hoplites, evens on impact, and they're 25 down in melee, but what I do like about them, this huge shield they have, they are armoured, and as much as I've given armour bit of a hard time in a lot of my videos, especially in other periods, I think against all the bowmen, I'd probably rather have these guys than veteran Hoplites, because veteran Hoplites are protected. So I'll pay the extra, I think. So yeah, I think they justifiably go in at 3rd on my list. At number 2 on my list, I'm going to go for the armoured veteran Hoplites. these are the absolute tanks of the period, because they are superior quality, they're armored, and they are offensive spears. So they really rip through most, if not all, units of this period. If you look at the stats against citizen hoplites, they're 50 up on impact, 75 up in melee. Armored hoplites, 50 up on impact and in melee. Immortals, evens on impact, but then 75 up in melee. And remember as well, with the armor, they're not going to take so many casualties, generally speaking. So that 75 up in melee is going to probably be quite useful. Sparrowbara foot, 50 up on impact, then 150 up in melee. And Mead foot, 50 up on impact, and then 125 up in melee. So that is awesome. What you've also got to factor in is a lot of those units I've just mentioned are bowmen. Immortals are bowmen, so they get an additional -1 modifier fighting heavy foot in the open, as do the Mead foot, because they are medium foot. So there's quite a lot of medium foot and bowmen on the battlefield, and even the better units like the Immortals don't stand up one-on-one anyway to these units. And really the biggest disadvantage is you just don't get enough of them. So we only get 2. We get a ton of armored hoplites, we get a ton of citizen hoplites. So this is the Kyrenian Greek list. We get tons of hoplites, but we really only get 2 of these units. So even with the Persians, you get 4 immortal units, double what we get here. But still, one-on-one, they are fantastic, and very few units are going to beat these. At number one on my list, I'm going to go for the Persian Immortals. Wonderful unit. I love unique units. This is a really unique and historical unit. We all have heard about the Persian Immortals. They look great, and they perform very, very well on the battlefield. They've got the bow and arrow ranged ability, plus they are superior quality and armored, so it's a heck of a combination. It really is. I did some tests. I was just doing a few little tests against hoplites. I had a bunch of armored hoplites with a few citizen hoplites. I had another group of veteran hoplites with a few citizen hoplites, and these Immortals were absolutely demolishing the hoplites. Because the problem is, for the hoplites, both citizen and veteran hoplites are only protected. So, with one volley of arrows, they were taking 40 or 50 casualties. And then you add that together with a couple more units firing at it, and they were often disrupting on the first round of fire, and there's 2 rounds of fire before melee. So a lot of those units were disrupting, or even if they weren't, the veteran hoplites obviously superior quality, so surviving cohesion checks, but once they got into melee, the veteran hoplites are only evens against the Immortals on impact. And they're already, if you've been fired upon, they're already, 80, 100 men down. And so eventually the combat strength modifier also kicked in for these immortal units against the hoplites. And yeah, there was just no hope. Yeah, the hoplites were disrupting, fragmenting. I mean, on impact, the Immortals are up 50 against citizen hoplites, and then evens in melee. They're up 50 against armored hoplites, because you don't count armor on impact, and then they're only 25 down in melee. But with the combat strength modifier, and a lot of those units would be disrupting as well, 25 down isn't a lot. And then the veteran hoplites, they're 50 down in melee. evens on impact. So they're just so strong, mixed in with some of your standard Sparabara foot. Very, very strong unit. Okay, sometimes some armies get the armored veteran hoplites, but you don't really see many of those. I think some lists only get maybe 2. I'm looking at these armies with 1200 points. That's what we've always used in the past. Not to say that some tournaments aren't going to use 1600 points in the future, but for this period we've always used 1200 points. So I think it's because armies generally historically were larger in the classical period and in LA as well. But it's debatable. This army actually might get stronger at 1600 points because you're going to get more bowmen on the field and you're going to have more immortals as well. So probably the Persian list, I think this is the 480 list, they might even be stronger at higher points. So they really justifiably go in at number 1. Also great against cavalry because they have the light spear and they're armored and they can fire upon cav as well. So just a very, very strong unit, elite unit. One of my favorite units, and yeah, a good unit for top of my list. Well, I hope you've enjoyed looking at my top 10. Maybe in a few weeks I'll produce top 10 of the worst units. We're getting there now. I've done most periods. The only period I haven't covered so far is early Middle Ages. Done High Middle Ages, done LA, done Classical, and we're doing this period at the moment. If you don't agree with some of my choices, please leave comments below, and see you all again soon.